outside Columbia University here in New York City tonight. Hundreds of the city's police are outside the campus as pro-Palestinian protesters continue to occupy a school building, now in defiance of university orders. Moments ago, the mayor of New York said the situation, quote, must end now. There are hundreds of surge unit police on the other side of the campus with visors ready to be pulled down and go in, and we have reporters there monitoring exactly what is happening. Out front now is Eric Cortellessa. He is a Time reporter who spoke to Donald Trump for nearly 90 minutes. And I know, Eric, you made a lot of headlines, and especially in context of this breaking news that is unfolding before our eyes tonight. You asked Trump in these extensive conversations you had, 90 minutes over two interviews, if he would call in the military to break up these protests on college campuses. What did he tell you?
Well, thanks for having me, Erin. Yes, I asked Donald Trump about this in the context of comments he reportedly made to his former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, who wrote in his book that Trump suggested during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020 that he order the shooting of protesters in the leg. Donald Trump didn't deny that he said that. He disparaged Esper as his worst Secretary of Defense. When I asked whether he would be willing to send the military on protesters as president, he said he likely wouldn't have to because he would rely mostly on the National Guard.
And mostly on the National Guard. So, it's just important context in light of these images. Obviously, Speaker Mike Johnson called for the National Guard days ago at Columbia. That hasn't yet happened, but we do see these, as our reporter said, the most surge police that he's ever seen covering protests in New York right now, massed outside the gates of Columbia University. You talked to Trump about political violence as well, and we'll see what happens here. But of course, from the left, many would characterize this as politically driven violence. On the right, of course, there was January 6th. So you asked Trump whether he was worried there'd be political violence this November, election month. He told you no, but I know you followed up with him in your extensive conversations, and he told you, and let me quote from you, Eric, if we don't win, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of an election. Tell me more.
Yeah, that really stood out to me. In our first conversation at Mar-a-Lago roughly 2 weeks ago, I asked whether he was worried about political violence in connection with the November election. And he said no. And I said, well, do you expect anything? He said, I think we're going to win. I think there won't be political violence. So when I had a chance to talk with him again on the phone 2 weeks later, I followed up on that and said, Mr. President, what if you don't win? And he said precisely what you just said. And, it stood out to me because he raised the specter of potential political violence if he doesn't win the election, which was alarming to many people.
Right, certainly, and especially considering that, his definition of what is a free election, at least in the last election, is not the definition of what a free election is. So what else struck you the most over these conversations that you had? And again, in 90 minutes, what else stood out to you, Eric?
What stood out to me was the fact that, Trump is ever more assertive and confident now than he's ever been. He is in the process of embarking on a strategic plan to return to the White House and be able to seize more power than he had in a first term, right? He is trying to consolidate power around his position as president and remove many of the guardrails that prevented him from carrying out a lot of the things he wanted to do in the first term. He's got a conservative army of advisors and aides who are preparing the mechanics of carrying out his agenda, and he is preparing right now to go into office if he wins to hit the ground running in a way that he wasn't prepared to the last time.
Just as you're watching, talking, Eric, everyone, you're looking on your screen at those surge unit police. You hear students yelling from a distance, "Why are you in riot gear?" And those police with their visors prepared to go into Columbia University as you're seeing this face-off here. Eric, you in your conversations with Trump, as we're watching this again unfold, you asked him about something he said to Sean Hannity when he talked about on day one. Trump says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" He's talking about a conversation with someone, and he tells this person, no, other than on day one. What did he explain to you about that?
Well, Trump essentially said that he was joking, that he was kidding around, that he was playing with the audience. Trump often is able to assume this role of almost stand-up comedian when he's in front of an audience, when he's at his rallies. It's part of his relationship with his supporters. He entertains them as well as speaks to them. But when I said, well, sir, don't you realize that this kind of talk of dictatorship strikes many Americans as contrary to our most fundamental democratic principles,
yes,
he said, no. In fact, he said, I think a lot of people like it.
All right, Eric, thank you, and thanks to all of you. It's time for AC360.
Good evening. Thanks for joining our special primetime coverage of the Trump hush money criminal trial. Day 9 saw something remarkable. The former president
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
court and threatened with jail time.
The university tossed out those demands. These students, though, say they will not leave until those demands are met. So as to when these protests are winding down, that is still anyone's guess. Nancy?
Okay, so let's talk about those demands, Tom. The protesters say that they want Columbia to sell all of its investments that are related to Israel. Is there any possibility that that will happen?
You know, that's a great question, Nancy. And let's look at history as a precedent here, because in the 1980s, students did almost the exact same thing at this very hall.
All right, CBS News on right now.
When it came to
on YouTube.
protesting the apartheid state in South Africa. Now, the university did reluctantly go along with the demands of the students ultimately. However, the dynamic this time is much different. The university has come out saying they will not heed those demands. And divestment in general, as I mentioned, means that the students want the university to cut ties with companies that they say profit from Israel's war in Gaza. The students we've spoken to cite companies that manufacture weapons. They've also cited tech companies that they say perpetuate settlements in Israel. So it really is a long list of companies that they have that they say they want the university to cut ties with. You know, that's a big ask for the university. It's a lot to consider. So far, the university says no. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And the university has a big dilemma on its hand. The president sent out a letter to alumni saying that students who don't commit to the terms that they're being offered and leave Hamilton Hall are now being suspended. Seniors will be ineligible to graduate. The university says this is about responding to the actions of the protesters, not their cause. They're creating a threatening environment. But so far, Tom, have you seen any students actually being suspended or dragged out of that hall?
Not yet. No, we have not, Nancy. But I can tell you, speaking to the environment that this has fostered for students on both sides of this issue, they have told me that they do not feel safe on this campus. That is something that is obviously a priority for the university, a big concern for university officials as we move ahead. But both sides agreeing on one thing. Maybe they can't agree on everything, but they are agreeing on one thing. A lot of students don't feel safe at this current moment. Nancy?
A big challenge for so many universities right now. How do you allow free speech, peaceful free speech, but also ensure that other students feel safe? Tom Hansen at Columbia University tonight. Thanks so much. And Columbia is far from the only university where tensions are rising. Classes at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, for instance, have been canceled after police broke up a pro-Palestinian encampment and detained some students, while at the University of Texas at Austin, protesters are staying put even after riot police made dozens of arrests on Monday. Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House to discuss all of this. Weijia, the White House came out pretty forcefully to condemn the takeover of that building on Columbia's campus. What are they saying?
That's right. President Biden himself has only spoken out once publicly since all of these protests really started ramping up, but certainly through his spokesperson for the National Security Council, John Kirby, it is clear that the White House is rebuking what happened. Kirby saying that this is absolutely the wrong approach and that it is not an example of peaceful protest. We also got a paper statement in which a spokesperson said President Biden has stood against repugnant anti-Semitic smears and violent rhetoric his entire life. And even though the president respects the right to free expression, he does condemn any kind of language that leads to hate or incites violence. And so you can see that, Nancy, this is a really tricky line for President Biden, because while he wants to support these protesters, he also has to make clear where he stands on how other students are feeling, which really is a reflection of how he's been trying to navigate the war in a broader sense, too.
Yeah, really interesting how they're calling out the use of particular terms like the word intifada. Ouija, the White House has made it really clear that they don't support a ground invasion of Rafah unless there's also a plan to protect civilians there. But I want to play you a clip of what the State Department spokesman Vedant Patel had to say today after the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu announced that he does plan to invade Rafah, whether there's a hostage deal or not. Take a listen.
We have not seen a credible plan that would address the varying areas of concerns that you've heard me talk about a number of times from up here and others, primarily the ability to address the serious humanitarian concerns surrounding, again, Rafah is a region with more than 1 million people seeking refuge. It's an area that continues to be an important conduit for humanitarian aid as well as a safe departure for foreign nationals. And so any kind of operation that does not address some of these key concerns would certainly be opposed by us.
So you've got U.S. officials saying they still haven't heard any plan from the Israelis about how they keep civilians safe in Rafah. What are they making of Netanyahu's new threat that he's going to invade anyway?
Oh, boy.
Well, even though this is his latest remark, it's not exactly new in terms of his position. The past few times Netanyahu has made public remarks about a potential ground invasion, he has made pretty clear that, yeah, we hear the critics, we hear allies even, but Netanyahu said he's going to proceed anyway, and has in the past even said he has chosen a date for this ground invasion. And even though the U.S. continues to say, Nancy, that they do not support this, they have not crystallized what potential consequences would be if there were an invasion. Of course, we should point out that the Biden administration has said that if Israel does not change its approach to the war, then the U.S. would have to change its approach. But we don't have any details about whether that means conditions on aid, whether that means sanctions, because, of course, this is a really important relationship that the president is trying to preserve, while also telling Netanyahu how he feels about his strategy.
Yep, you've been asking, we've all been asking, but so far we haven't gotten a lot of specifics on that particular topic. Ouija Jiang, thanks so much.